Hello, and welcome to the History Inquirer. Today, I will continue on from last episode by talking about the battles of Lexington, Concord, Bunker Hill, and the Siege of Boston, including Paul Revere's famous ride. I have a lot to talk about, so grab a drink and a snack, get comfortable, and let's get started. The year was 1775. Tensions were rising between the British and the American colonists. The Americans had begun establishing militias and stockpiling weapons, gunpowder, ammunition, and supplies in places like Concord, Massachusetts. Some of these militiamen were also known as Minutemen, who were trained and required to be ready to fight at a minute's notice. They were selected by the commanders out of the militia and were typically under 25 years of age. General Thomas Gage, the military and rural governor of Massachusetts, ordered the colonial military stores at Concord confiscated. The British forces, 700 regulars, were led by Lieutenant Colonel Francis Smith, as well as Major John Pitcairn. However, the Sons of Liberty heard about the British plans, they heard about what was going on here, and proceeded to move most of the supplies out of town. What they did not know was when the British were going to make their move. One member of the Sons of Liberty, Paul Revere, a silversmith by trade, went to Concord on April 16th to let the Patriots know about the British plan to seize their supplies. Dr. Joseph Warren, another patriot, learned that the British were planning to march on Lexington and then on to Concord on April 19th. So he sent Paul Revere and William Dawes on two different routes to spread the word and rouse the militia. As a failsafe, the sexton Robert Newman and vestryman John Pulling of Boston's Old North Church were instructed to hang lanterns in the bell tower, one by land, two by sea. The British were going by sea across the Charles River, so two lanterns were hung. That night, Paul Revere and William Dawes set out to spread the word that the British were coming. Or rather, the regulars were coming, because the colonists at the time still refer to themselves as British subjects. So, saying the British coming would not make much sense. That actually comes from a poem by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow in the mid-19th century. So, yeah, that's where that comes from. Yeah, so they would have said something more akin to, like, hey, the regulars are coming out and get ready. Anyways, Revere and Dawes ended up meeting with another member of the Sons of Liberty on the way around Lexington, Samuel Prescott, who joined them in their mission. On the way to Concord, the three men met with a roadblock set by British regulars. Only Prescott ended up making it to Concord. Dawes managed to escape, but fell off his horse. And Paul Revere was briefly captured and had his horse confiscated, but then he was released as the British soldiers heard the gunfire from Lexington and set off to spread the word that, hey, there's something's going on. Paul Revere ended up making his way back to Lexington and assisted John Hancock and his family in getting away safely from the battle taking place on Lexington Green. Early in the morning, on April 19th, 1775, in Lexington, 700 British regulars faced off against a rebel force of 80 men, some sources say 77, led by Captain John Parker, who fired first as a matter of some debate, although according to the colonists, and including Captain John Parker himself, it was the British who fired first, known as the shot heard around the world. The Americans returned fire and a skirmish ensued, leaving 8 militiamen dead and 10 wounded. The American forces dispersed and regrouped, either with forces at Concord or other forces in the general area. The British then marched on Concord, where they met a force of 320 to 400 American militia at Concord North Bridge and were forced to retreat. On the way back to Boston, the British troops were continually shot at by American militia practicing guerrilla warfare from stone walls, barns, houses, trees, etc. The British had 273 casualties, while the Americans had 95 casualties. As a result, patriot morale soared and many sought to join their ranks. Around 16,000 men from across New England. It was an embarrassing defeat for the British and would lead to the siege of Boston and the Battle of Bunker Hill. Following the battles of Lexington and Concord, the Americans quickly moved to secure the heights around Boston, while the British received reinforcements. In June, the British planned to attack the militia. On June 15th and 16th, the Patriots moved to fortify Breed's Hill on the Charlestown Peninsula. This was an error, as they were supposed to fortify Bunker Hill, which was higher and more easily defensible. And General Gage, seeing this, knew he had to take action, so he sent General William Howe and 3,000 British troops across Boston Harbor to land and take Breed's Hill. As the British troops marched up the hill in formation, the Americans held their fire until, as Officer William Prescott supposedly said, "Don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes." The Americans fired, unleashing a withering volley of fire into the British ranks. The British retreated, regrouped, and tried again to assault the hill, marching upon the bodies of their fallen comrades. The British retreated again. Again, they were repulsed by the fire of the defenders. On the third assault, the British finally succeeded in breaking through the Patriot fortifications, but only because the Patriots were running low on ammunition. Fierce hand-to-hand fighting ensued, with British Major John Buchanan falling to a black American militiaman. In the end, the British were victorious, but at great cost. British casualties were 1,054 to the American 450. Not wanting to waste more men assaulting rebel fortifications on the other heights around Boston, the British would settle in for a siege, though raids and skirmishes between the two forces continued. The American forces that chose to remain and continue to fight for independence ended up becoming the core of the Continental Army under George Washington, who would arrive in Cambridge 2 weeks later in early July 1775. He would then send Henry Knox on a daring mission across snowy and challenging terrain to bring cannons from the recently captured Fort Ticonderoga to Boston and fortify Dorchester Heights. This was finally completed in early March of 1776. It was because of that the British were compelled to evacuate to Nova Scotia. And Ticonderoga was taken by Ethan Allen and Benedict Arnold. And then, as I said, the cannons were then used to compel the British to leave the city of Boston. Now, the battles proved that the Americans could fight against the British, stand their ground, and win, even though they were a ragtag band of militia. Even though they were farmers and blacksmiths and tailors, even though they were not professional soldiers, they could stand and hold their ground against some of the best soldiers in the world at the time. It would take General George Washington some time to turn them into a proper army, but that is a story for another time. Following the siege of Boston, Washington would relocate the Continental Army to New York City, where the Battle of Brooklyn would soon begin. That is where we shall pick up next time on History Inquirer. Thank you all for watching. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. And I'll see you all next time on the History Inquirer. Thank you.